So I've been getting a lot of questions about how to work with sky panels in Unreal. So today I'm going to show how to do this in Unreal 427. This can be made to work in 426, but some of the features I'm going to show today are specific to 427. So a lot of times what I get is kind of what I'm showing here in the bottom right. So I have my camera set up aimed at my wall, and my wall's kind of a neutral gray, and the exposure is set to a fixed value, and the color temp set to 6500. So what is happening? I'm setting red, green, and blue. I'm in direct control, and so I get this kind of lavender color. And a lot of times people are like, well, why am I getting this if I have even amounts of red, green, and blue? It should be like a white of some sort. So is it because I'm missing the W channel? Like, do I need to add this in or something? And that's only probably like half the story, right? But just for clarification, if you pull off the frost, you can see there are 4 individual LEDs. There's red, green, and blue, and then a variable white. So if you're in CCT mode exclusively, it's only using the white LED, and the other ones are not being used. However, if you're trying to mix colors, of course you need them and probably the white one. However, but in trying to get this in direct control without some sort of calibration or color chart is going to be nearly impossible to guess what the formula should be. So if I just snap it into calibrated, I mean, that's kind of like the end of the video, right? But not really. Technically, usually they would default to 2800, so you would see this. So there needs to be a way to set that, color temperature. But then beyond that, if I have all 3 colors, it mixes white, right? So, but why is this, and how do I set this? This is kind of what I'm going to go over today. And then specifically how to work with this inside of Unreal. So the main thing with this is that we do need to have it inside, in this color mode, this calibrated color mode, because there really is, red, green, and blue are somewhat arbitrary when it comes to, what actual value on the spectrum they are, based on the light. So they have to be calibrated to something. And so RE has kind of a nice way of dealing with this. That you just, literally when you log into Fixture, put it in calibrated RGBW mode. At that point, I can just send it RGB values and it is going to interpret them. However, this is also based on color temperature. So it goes between 2800 and 10,000. So we have to set that through DMX if we're going to be using our, DMX as our controller. I'm going to set this to linear in our dimmer curve, but you could also set this to other things. There's also some other special modes, so I encourage everybody to read the documentation about these so you can see what they do. But since it is a color calibrated mode and LEDs can only go so low in intensity before that calibration degrades or goes away completely, they have these other special modes. So it may be better if you need smooth dimming to go into stage mode or low end mode. But these are also possibly prone to flickering because of how LEDs work. So definitely read about those modes. And then on the other side of that, we also have the DMX modes that we're going to change. So if I go to the DMX settings, today I'm going to talk about mode 6 and mode 25. Mode 6 is a 20 channel mode that gives us the CCT and RGBW and has a couple extra channels. And then 25 is if we had multiple cells. So if I again look at the DMX documentation for multiple cells, like these are the modes in DMX. I have an S30, so I have 1 cell, so I'm going to show that, and then you can also have 2 cells, 4 cells, depending on what type of light you have, and this is how they're laid out. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that there is a color temperature that's set right, and this is set in 16 bits or 8 bits, depending on what mode you're in. However, it's not just like the value of the color temperature. So it goes from 2800 to 10,000, so they give you the formula to do it. I've already pre-calculated what this should be, but you may need to do this on your own if you're using a different value. But so we'll go back, and mode 6, just for reference, is this one. So we got this chunk of it, and then there's like a couple on the end that we're not using. Right, so in Unreal, if we're going to do this, a couple of things to note about 27 that are slightly different. Inside the project settings, if I go to my DMX plugin, we have this concept of ports now. So inside of our library, so I already created a DMX library, there's no more protocols section. The ports are handled on the project level, and you can create as many of them as you want, and then just tell it an asset which ones you would like to use. So in this case, I'm using ArtNet B. This is good because before there was really no unified system for this, but now it's all kind of goes through these ideas of ports. So I'm using ArtNet, broadcasting, and I'm sending basically on Universe 1. The other thing to kind of know about this, I'll show here, is if you're using like a single cell mode, you can actually just import the GTF. I got this straight off their website. You import the XML, and it gives me access to all 30 modes right here, which is great. The only kind of catch to this is mode 25 or any of these multiple cell modes, the LE light engine modes. We don't have a way to properly read the GTFs to deal with matrices and cells. So right now, it's only kind of useful if you're in single cell mode. If you need to use the multiple cells, you're going to have to do a little work and create it. I'm not going to go into an exhaustive show how to do this, but just know that that's something that you're going to have to do. So in mode 6 though, so I'll put this back. Also note that the attributes here may be slightly different. By default, we don't show a CTC or CCT tint or color crossfade. And the reason for this is there's probably about 200 plus GTF attributes that we could have put in here. That list would be pretty exhausting. So we only give you about 30 to start with that are the most common. However, these ones did not make the list. So I went in here and manually added CTC. I even spelled it wrong. So I could go in and fix this. And what this keyword is it will try and recursively look up when you bring in a GTF, like what is inside of it. Xfade and tint, right? So now that I've changed these, I go back here and it's gonna give me an error like, I don't know what this is, you did something. So I'm gonna put it back on CCT and we should be good to go. I may have to do the same thing on the matrix because it was also referencing that same thing. And there we go. So that should be good. So now that we're good on that, we have our thing, we have our two types. So I've created the single cell, and then I also have this matrix cell, right? So when you click this matrix checkbox, you'll get access to this menu. So you can pick the ordering, how many cells are in it, and an XY layout, and then what are the cell attributes. So you can see this one's 32 channels, and these are the ones that we're using. So this is directly following mode 25. I then patched these, so I put in 2 of the S30s. They would just go back to back because we have the correct channel step. But when I'm doing it in the matrix or multi-cell mode, it's slightly different because on these fixtures, there's this fan channel. So on the S30, it would go on channel 17, so it would go right after the cells. But if you had an S60, it would go after both cells, so it'd be on 33. Currently in Unreal, we don't have a way to actually put functions after the cells. So I had to manually offset these by 1 every time. I could just go in here and create like a new fixture type that has a single channel like dimmer, right? And then go and put this in here if I really wanted to if I really wanted, oh yeah, hold on. So let's just say this was the fan channel, right? And if I go and put this on, right, like I can put this in the gaps, right, if I wanted to. But it's not really mandatory. Like there's, unless you need the fan channel, it's perfectly fine just to like literally leave them blank. And it's not going to cause any problems, but just know that you do have to account for that channel when you're patching them in a multi-cell mode. Okay, so now we will move this guy move our camera over to the left so we can kind of see what's going on. So I'm going to open up the channel monitor just to make sure, so I'm not sending anything right now on DMX. And then I'm going to set my universe to 1, so that's what I'm going to be working with. And as soon as I do that, and then I send some data from Unreal, so if I just open up like an output console, you see my camera goes black immediately. And part of the reason behind this is that we're not sending, we're literally sending zeros, but as soon as I do that, I get access to a different kind of readout. So like the light control goes away once it sees DMX. So if I look at my fixture status, you can see that I'm receiving ArtNet. This is what's being received right now. It shows you the whole universe. Now if I go to light control, it shows you what's being received on every channel, which right now is all zeros, so that makes sense. So I'll go and close that out. So what I'm going to do now is create the pixel mapping asset over again. So I'll show that. So we'll just create the sky panel 2, and we'll open this up. And then I'm going to use a material. The reason I'm using a material is it just gives me some more control. So I've created a material that I like that has some gain and hue and saturation and stuff like this, because a lot of this is art and not all science. And so I can kind of have more control than if I have a texture, because then I can just manipulate these values and I can swap the textures out, right? So I'm going to set the size to 512 by 512, and then I'm going to add in a fixture group. So in the prior versions of Unreal, there was a fixture group and a matrix because they were treated separately. Now fixture groups contain both normal fixtures and matrix style. So that was kind of a nice unification there. So now there's not differences. So then I'm going to pick the library that I have. So I have a sky panel library here, and these are the fixtures that are in that. So I'm going to pull out one of my single cells, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to pull out one of my matrix cells. Now there's no reason I can pull out multiples. I can multi-select and drag them in, it's fine, but I'm only really going to be able to show one in the camera view, so we'll go with that for now. So right now I'm set to kind of receive, I'm matching this one, this first one here. So if I go and I hit play, like of course like nothing happens. And the reason for this, it may not be obvious, but like I am actually I'm sending RGB, like they're sending full white, but the problem is I'm not actually transmitting the other channels that we need to make this work. Inside mode 6, there's a parameter for crossfade, meaning do we use CCT only or are we using RGBW? There's a parameter for dimmer and a parameter for color temperature. So the way we're going to deal with that now is called modulators. We used to have extra attributes, but they were somewhat limited in what they could do. So since this is a normal fixture, I'm going to add one modulator type. I'm going to add an extra attribute modulator, and then I'm going to add the different types I need. So the first one I need actually is dimmer, so that's convenient. I'm going to set this to 20%. So this value is normalized. That way, if you change your bit depths later, so you have 8-bit, 16, it doesn't matter. This is going to still work. So we have dimmer, then we have X-fade, and then we have CCT. So the X-fade needs to be 1, so that we're going to use RGBW, and then our CCT values, I have pre-calculated what I need. So it's going to be let me see, what is it? Okay. 0.5139. And the reason that this is what it is, again, I kind of went over this earlier, but we're going to take that calculation, create our DMX value, and then we have to normalize it based on a 0 to 1. So this should be a 6500 value. So now that I have these values to be sent with RG and B, when I hit play, I should get white in my camera, and I do. And then if I were to drag this around in the different cells, I get red, I get green, I get blue, just kind of as expected, right? But the main thing is that, white is actually white. Now to show kind of just what would happen, again, if this is not set to calibrated, like it just will go back to that setting that it was before. So as soon as it's uncalibrated, now I'm listening to, the correct parameters, and I can see what I'm sending here. I'm sending red, green, and blue, and a crossfade at 100. 6500 color temperature, so my math was good, and intensity of 20%. And that's kind of how this would work for a single cell. Now, to show this method again with a multi-cell, same kind of thing applies. So I'm going to have to add those modulators again. So in this case, though, it's going to be extra cell attributes because we're doing it for every individual cell, not the fixture as a whole. So same thing, I'm going to add this one, so I'll get dimmer, add one for X-fade, and add one for CCT. And again, You can select multiple fixtures and and do this all at once, so you don't have to do this like one by one or anything like that. And actually, I'm just gonna copy this value. Okay, and now the same thing with mode 25. So I'm gonna go back to the fixture, go to DMX settings, change it into mode 25, which will give me that one for it, and then I have that one on universe 2. And that just correlates to what I set here, right? Universe 2, channel 1. And so now when I do the same thing, if I hit play again, I should get white. And if I drag this around, I get red, green, blue, so on and so forth, right? And that is mostly kind of how this should work. Now, so if you're clever and you've seen the other videos, you kind of realize, all right, great. So if I want to do this for a scene, great, drop in a scene capture, just swap out the texture, right? So we got RGT, pixel map. Now we have this in here. Do this, hit play, ta-da, like I move this around and it's gonna read the colors. So a couple of things to maybe think about. Firstly, especially if it's a sky, does this really make sense? You know, do I actually read the color of the sky and project it in the light back onto things? The cube isn't blue, so why would I put blue light on it? And so this kind of gets into this question of like, well, why are we reading the scene in this case? Because technically the sky color is the reflected light color, so it's only blue because it's reflected from somewhere else. The actual color is whatever the sun color is. So it doesn't make sense to read the scene capture in all cases. However, you know, if you're trying to do different effects, maybe it does make sense. But this is just one thing to kind of, you know, think about as this is going on. Some other kind of thoughts on this is whenever you're doing this, you know, in Unreal, there's lots of different places to modify the colors, right? The first thing right off the bat is on the scene capture, it'll actually default to scene color, which if you notice in the camera, it gives me a very different result than if in final color linear. That's because the scene color doesn't have any of the post-processing applied to it. So be very aware where you're modifying color. There's places to do it here, there's tone curve, there's tone mapping, and there's also just settings for textures, right? So on the texture itself, you know, there's a render target format. If I were to do this in 8 bits, that's the maximum amount of range I can get on that. They default to 16, but just know that that's possible. And then also if you're reading like textures, well, they can also be set in linear or sRGB space, which will affect the result. So just be aware of what you're doing, what color space you're in, what you're doing with your color pipeline when you're trying to do this stuff. And so to kind of go over one other concept, I'm going to set this back to my grid as it's kind of easy to see and understand what's happening with this last concept. No, don't want to actually save that now, I guess. So the last kind of concept on this is just the idea of like, how are we sampling, you know, what's going on? Because in this example, if I get just slightly outside of the red, the camera goes black, and if I get just slightly inside, just more than half of it in there. So what's actually happening here, and like, does this make sense? This is definitely up for debate, I think, as to what should happen in this case. But what controls this is actually the cell blending quality. Because like, should it be red in this case? I mean, almost half of it's black, so does it really make sense to send that? So if we go and set this to medium, and move, like, so I guess easier to show this. If I go up just slightly, it goes black, because now more, you know, the center of this thing is black. If I set this to medium, you can see what happens is now we get like a mix of like what's going on here. And if I set it to high, we get an even better kind of sampling of what's happening. This may even be more obvious if I go and do something like this, right? So now you can see this first cell is actually this teal color. But like, whether or not this is what you should get, again, is up for somewhat of interpretation. Like, technically speaking, most of this cell is black. So I don't know if it really makes too much sense that we're sending teal, right? And because technically there's no teal in any of this, right? But it is a combination of red, of green, blue, and black. So this just something to be aware of. It's not necessarily right or wrong, but depending on what mode you have your cell blending in, you may get different results. So keep an eye on what's going on down here, and this will be good, a good reference. And then if you're not sure, what you're getting, you can always go check on your light and see what channels are being transmitted and received, and as kind of a check on that side to make sure that makes sense. So hopefully this kind of helps illuminate some of these topics about how this could work. If you want to talk to the sky panels in a different way from Unreal or from the pixel mapper, there's also nodes to do this as well. So there's blueprint nodes, there's C++ functions, so you can just talk directly to channels and write other logic to do it. That I think that this is definitely a valid case for doing different effects and for reading screen elements, like especially if you have light sources that you're trying to capture that would be projected onto something. And hopefully we can do maybe another one of these at some point to go over some more of the finer details. So hopefully this helps, and I look forward to doing something else with these panels more in the future. They're really great quality. They have a ton of options and such, but just I guess the wrap and recap on this is like calibrated will definitely be your friend if you're trying to send RGB values. That way you don't need to send W. Make sure that when this is being sent though, that you're paying attention to your color temperature, because by default it will be at 2800, so that's going to be pretty yellow for most cases. Again, thanks, and we'll see you soon.